Hey Carl, great to hear about your trip to Gettysburg. It sounds like you and the missus had a lot of fun. Gettysburg is one of those super cool places to visit, and it's really hot this year because it actually is now in 2013, the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, which was the turning point in all of American history because it was the turning point of the Civil War. As you mentioned, it's all about Abraham Lincoln when you go there from a tourist perspective today, and people will talk about the Gettysburg Address, probably the most famous political speech ever made, one of the most famous speeches in history, certainly in American history, and people used to memorize it. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth, what did they do? Our fathers something, forefathers. 7 years ago. Yes, I do talk about Abraham Lincoln and Gettysburg in my book, Undead. My book was under deadline, and I had 3 days to complete the manuscript. So I went to Gettysburg thinking I would have some time to reflect. It's a very famous cemetery, and there's just a lot of amazing things to see. As I walked around the cold cemetery of Gettysburg that January, it occurred to me that Lincoln really embodied the crossroads of faith and meaning, and in that dark setting of death, he said we have to dedicate ourselves to the unfinished task, the great work before us. And when he used that phrase, a new birth of freedom, I wonder how much that really meant personally to him. A few years ago when I was a grad student, I heard that Abraham Lincoln had gone on his own faith journey and that it culminated at Gettysburg. A preacher had supposedly written a letter to Lincoln and asked him how he felt about God or Jesus. I heard that there was an actual reply from Lincoln claiming his faith in Jesus. This was really interesting to me. So on a trip with my school down to Washington D.C, I made arrangements to go into Ford's Theater, which is where Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And a nice historian and curator named Michael Nione took me up to the top floor, closed off to the public, and he let me go into the archives and look into the book where Lincoln's letter was. I turned to the page number I was told to turn to, and sure enough, there was a letter written from Abraham Lincoln to the preacher. I believe it was authentic, and Lincoln said that he was not a believer in Jesus when he went to Washington, D.C. to begin serving as president. And he was not even okay with God after the death of his second son. But he said, when I looked out across the hallowed grounds of Gettysburg, that was when he placed his life in the hands of Christ. And that's a really remarkable picture to imagine him sitting in the house that you just saw, writing this message that would become so famous. He had no clue his 2-minute speech would become so famous. And was he in that very night realizing for the first time his own freedom that he was finding through God, as he had become the emancipator to give freedom to the slaves in America? And when he spoke of that new birth of freedom, did it mean perhaps that he was experiencing a regeneration within his own soul? If that letter is to be believed, then Gettysburg doesn't only commemorate where thousands of men died, it also marks the spot where at least one man found ultimate life. It's a pretty cool twist on a famous historic event. See you next time, Carl.